For thousands of years, land meant survival. Empires rose from it. Wars were fought over it. But in the modern world, something changed. Power shifted into code, data, and invisible systems. Or at least, that's what we were told. Because while the world was distracted by digital wealth, a quieter, far more ancient asset was being accumulated again. Not for profit alone, but for control. Not for today, but for what comes next. While billions chase artificial intelligence, while markets explode with digital assets, some of the most powerful individuals on Earth are moving in the opposite direction, away from screens, away from volatility, into something tangible, something ancient, something that cannot crash overnight. They are buying land, not small pieces, but entire ecosystems of production. This is not random investment. This is coordinated accumulation. Millions of hectares quietly changing hands, from local farmers to corporate entities to private portfolios, at a scale that most people will never see. And yet it is happening everywhere, across continents, across borders, across systems that feed entire nations. The question is no longer if it's happening, but why it's happening now. Land doesn't make headlines the way tech does. It doesn't trend. It doesn't go viral. But quietly, ownership is shifting, not with noise, but with signatures. Not with announcements, but with silence. And by the time the world notices, the map has already changed, because land, once sold, rarely returns. Every system depends on something simple: food. No matter how advanced the world becomes, or no matter how powerful technology gets, human survival still begins here, in soil, in water, in harvest cycles that cannot be digitized. And whoever controls that system controls something far greater than wealth. At first glance, it looks like normal agriculture: fields, crops, machinery. But look closer, and patterns begin to emerge. Ownership structures repeating across regions. Infrastructure becoming standardized. Operations optimized beyond traditional farming. This is no longer just land. It is a system, a controlled, scalable network of production, designed not for survival, but for dominance. The buyers rarely appear in public. There are no press conferences, no announcements, no celebrations, because this is not a public move. It is strategic positioning, hidden behind companies, funds, and layers of ownership. By the time a name surfaces, the land has already been secured. This is not farming the way it used to be. This is agriculture powered by data. Every inch of soil measured, every drop of water tracked, every harvest predicted before it happens. Land is no longer just physical. It is digital intelligence layered over reality. And those who control the data don't just grow food, they control the output of entire regions. But land alone is not enough. There is something even more critical beneath it. Water, invisible, yet essential, and increasingly it's scarce. Owning farmland often means controlling water access, aquifers, rivers, irrigation rights. In a warming world, this may be the real asset being acquired. The global population continues to rise, cities expand, demand accelerates, and pressure builds on the systems that feed billions. More mouths, less certainty, and limited land capable of sustaining large-scale production. This imbalance is not temporary. It is structural, and those who see it early position themselves before the crisis becomes visible. There is one truth that cannot be ignored: land is finite. You can create digital assets endlessly, but you cannot create fertile soil at scale. Every year, the productive land disappears, converted, degraded, or lost. And what remains becomes more valuable than ever before. This is no longer just billionaires. Institutions have entered the game. Funds, corporations, strategic investors, all moving toward the same conclusion. Farmland is not just agriculture, it is infrastructure. A long-term asset with predictable output and global demand. And once institutions move in, the scale changes forever. Piece by piece, acre by acre, the landscape is consolidating. What was once fragmented is becoming centralized, quietly, deliberately, without resistance. Because most people still don't see it, but the shift is already underway. And once complete, it may be impossible to reverse. Farmland is only the beginning. The real system extends far beyond the fields. Processing, storage, distribution, a chain that moves food from soil to cities to billions of lives. And when ownership starts at the source, control can extend through every layer, from harvest to market to price. This is not just agriculture. It is infrastructure for survival. Food is not just consumed. It is traded, priced, controlled by supply and demand. But when supply becomes concentrated, something changes. Prices no longer reflect only nature, they reflect ownership, and those who control production at scale can influence outcomes far beyond the farm. Land ownership has always meant power, but in today's world, its meaning is evolving. It is no longer just territory, it is production capacity, control over resources, influence over systems that cannot fail. Because when everything else becomes uncertain, food remains essential. And whoever controls it holds leverage no digital asset can replicate. The environment is no longer predictable. Seasons shift, weather patterns intensify, floods, droughts, extremes that disrupt production cycles, and every disruption reduces stability. In a world like this, only the most resilient land survives, and those who own the best land become even more powerful over time. Not all land is equal. Some regions are becoming more valuable than others. Areas with stable water, predictable climates, and high-yield soil, these are the new safe zones, the breadbaskets of the future, and they are being identified, mapped, and acquired long before the world fully understands their importance. This is happening faster than it appears. Deals closing quietly, land changing hands in clusters, small pieces becoming large networks, and with every acquisition, control increases because scale changes everything. The larger the land, the greater the influence, and the harder it becomes to compete. The larger the land, the greater the influence, and the harder it becomes to compete. For generations, land belonged to those who worked it. Families passed it down, community to community. But that model is changing. Rising costs, economic pressure, and opportunity are shifting ownership away from individuals. And once sold, that land rarely returns to its original hands. The system is consolidating. What was once distributed is becoming centralized. Fewer owners, larger control. More efficiency, but also more dependency, because when production concentrates, so does risk, and so does power. Because when production concentrates, so does risk, and so does power. The shift is already underway, and once complete, it may be impossible to reverse. This is no longer a theory, it is a shift already in motion, a silent restructuring of one of the world's most essential systems. Land, water, food, moving into fewer hands, not loudly, not publicly, but decisively. And as this transformation continues, one question begins to surface above all others. What happens when control of food becomes control of the future? Food does not stay where it is grown. It moves across borders, across oceans, across entire continents. A global network connecting producers to consumers, invisible to most, yet essential to all. But within this system, control is not evenly distributed. Some produce, some depend, and some control the flow in between. Most of the world does not grow its own food. Cities rely entirely on supply chains, daily deliveries, constant flow, without interruption, because even a short disruption can create immediate pressure. This is dependency at scale, and dependency creates vulnerability. This is dependency at scale, and dependency creates vulnerability. Food has always been political, but now it is becoming strategic, not just for nations, but for those who control production itself. Because when supply tightens, leverage increases. And in moments of crisis, access to food can shape decisions far beyond agriculture. And in moments of crisis, access to food can shape decisions far beyond agriculture. The acquisition is not limited to one country. It is global. Investors purchasing land far from their own borders, producing food in one region to supply another, creating networks that stretch across nations, and in doing so, extending influence far beyond geography. As value increases, so does protection. These are no longer open fields. They are assets, secured, monitored, protected, because what they produce is no longer just food. It is strategic output, and strategic assets are never left unguarded. Most people will never see this system. They don't need to. Food appears on shelves, and life continues. But behind that simplicity, a complex network operates, controlled, managed, optimized. Invisible, yet essential. And because it remains unseen, it continues to expand without resistance. Invisible, yet essential. And because it remains unseen, it continues to expand without resistance. The pace is increasing. Faster acquisitions, faster development, faster integration into global systems. Because once momentum builds, it becomes self-sustaining. Capital flows where stability exists. And in an unstable world, land offers something few assets can: continuity. And in an unstable world, land offers something few assets can: continuity. A shift is underway, quiet but undeniable, from fragmented ownership to consolidated control, from local production to global systems, from simple farming to strategic infrastructure. And as this transformation continues, the balance begins to change. Because the future may not belong to those who control technology alone, but to those who control what the world cannot live without. At first, it looks disconnected. Separate farms, separate regions, separate owners. But step back, and a different picture begins to form. A network, not random, but aligned, not isolated, but connected, across borders, across systems, across continents. A structure forming quietly, hidden in plain sight. A structure forming quietly, hidden in plain sight. This is no longer just investment. It goes beyond profit, beyond returns, beyond traditional ownership. This is positioning, strategic, long-term, calculated. Because those making these moves are not reacting to the present. They are preparing for the future. Because those making these moves are not reacting to the present. They are preparing for the future. The future is not guaranteed to be stable. Markets shift, supply chains fracture, systems strain under pressure. And in those moments, the difference between abundance and scarcity becomes clear. Because when disruption hits, the most valuable assets are not digital, they are essential. And nothing is more essential than food. For most of human history, food was a shared necessity, grown locally, distributed naturally, accessible through effort and labor. But what happens when that system changes? When production becomes centralized, ownership concentrated, and access influenced by forces beyond the field? What happens when food becomes power? The shift has already begun, quietly, silently, across the world. And while most are still focused on the digital future, a different kind of power is being secured. One rooted in soil, in water, in the systems that sustain life itself. Because in the end, the future may not be decided by who controls technology, but by who controls the land that feeds the world. Behind closed doors, the conversation is changing. This is no longer just about markets or investments or economic growth. It is about security, national, global, systemic. Because as land ownership shifts, so does control over something every nation depends on. For decades, oil defined global power, energy controlled economies. Conflicts were shaped around it, but slowly another resource is taking its place. Less visible, but just as critical: food. Because unlike energy, food cannot be substituted. Governments have begun to recognize a new reality. Food security is national security. The ability to feed a population is as critical as defending borders. And when that ability depends on external systems, vulnerability increases. Because control over food can influence stability and even sovereignty itself. The line between public and private is becoming less clear. Because while governments recognize the importance of food, private entities are acquiring the assets: land, water, production capacity. And when critical systems move into private hands, the balance of control begins to shift. This is not happening in isolation, it is global. Nations, corporations, investors, all moving within the same space, competing, positioning, securing access. Because in a world of limited resources, those who move first gain the advantage. Ownership is crossing borders, land purchased far from home, production controlled remotely, resources flowing outward toward distant markets. And in this model, the local land becomes part of a global system, serving interests beyond its own region. Dependency comes with risk. When supply is external, control is limited. And when disruptions occur, impact is immediate. Cities feel it first. Populations react quickly because modern systems operate on constant flow. And when that flow slows, stability is tested. A new map is forming, not based on borders, but on resources, on production, on control of essential systems. And as this map evolves, power begins to reorganize. Because the future may not be defined by geography alone, but by who controls life-sustaining systems. Food does not need to be weaponized in the traditional sense. It does not require force or conflict. All it takes is control over supply. A delay, a restriction, a redirection, and suddenly entire regions begin to feel pressure. Modern systems are built on constant flow, efficiency, speed, just-in-time delivery. But this efficiency comes with fragility, because when the flow stops, there is no buffer, no reserve, no time to adjust. And even a small disruption can cascade into something much larger. Global food production is not evenly distributed. A few regions produce, while many depend. This creates leverage points, specific locations with outsized influence. And when those locations become concentrated under fewer owners, the leverage becomes even stronger. In times of stability, trade flows naturally, but in times of tension, everything becomes negotiable. Access, priority, price, and terms. Because when supply is limited, those who control it set the conditions. Everything is on the table when survival is at stake. Now imagine multiple disruptions at the same time. Climate events, logistical breakdowns, regional instability. Not isolated, but overlapping, each one reducing output. And suddenly, the system begins to strain, increasing pressure. When pressure builds, it doesn't stay contained, it spreads. From farms, to markets, to cities, prices rise, access tightens, confidence weakens, and what began as a supply issue becomes something much larger. The breakdown of the modern order. In moments of instability, control becomes tighter, distribution becomes managed, access becomes regulated, because maintaining order requires coordination. But coordination also means control, and control shifts power toward those who already hold the system. As pressure builds and the balance begins to change, new alliances form. Old systems adjust, supply routes shift, because every nation must adapt. And those with access to production gain influence in shaping the outcome, the reorganization of the global order. And above it all, there are those who anticipated this shift, who moved early, who secured the land, the water, the production, not reacting to crisis, but preparing for it. Because in a world of uncertainty, the greatest advantage belongs to those who control what cannot be replaced. The silent architects of the new power. This is not reactive behavior, it is strategic, planned years in advance, based on data, projections, and long-term trends. Because those operating at this level do not wait for the future to arrive. They position themselves ahead of it, quietly, deliberately shaping the landscape. Behind every field, there is a system, monitoring, analyzing, controlling, from soil conditions to harvest timing to global distribution routes. This is not traditional agriculture, it is a coordinated network, designed for efficiency and scalability, the invisible grid. Piece by piece, a grid is forming, connected land, connected systems, connected outputs, everything synchronized, everything optimized, because when production becomes predictable, control becomes easier. And when control becomes centralized, influence expands. Any point can be managed. A network that never sleeps, the consolidation of nature. The future of land is not just physical, it is digital. Data layers, predictive systems. Automated operations, the same intelligence that powers technology, is now embedded in the soil. And when digital control meets physical resources, the result is something entirely new. A complete integration of life and machine. Any outcome can be projected. Control is no longer limited to one point, it spans the entire chain, from land to harvest, to storage, to distribution, a full spectrum system where each layer connects to the next. And when one entity influences multiple layers, its power multiplies. Any weakness is removed. The ultimate synergy of assets, control over the entire life cycle. This is the model of the future. Efficient, predictable, scalable, designed to minimize risk and maximize output. But with that efficiency comes centralization. And with centralization comes dependence on the system itself. Any deviation is managed. A world where survival is a managed output, efficiency at any cost. As systems become more advanced, dependence increases, fewer alternatives, fewer independent sources, more reliance on centralized production, because efficiency replaces redundancy, and redundancy is what once provided resilience. Any break now is critical. The lock-in effect of the modern age, reliance by design. When systems centralize, access becomes controlled. Who receives supply, when, and how much. All determined within the system. And while this ensures efficiency, it also creates a single point of influence. A system where decisions at the top impact everyone below. Any lever can be pulled. The gatekeepers of the new world. Access as the ultimate leverage. And slowly, power consolidates. Fewer owners, greater control. Larger systems, wider influence. Because scale is the ultimate multiplier, any advantage is amplified. And those who achieve it reshape the system itself. Any competition is absorbed. The new aristocracy of the soil, the architecture of monopoly. The system is no longer forming, it is already here, integrated, connected, expanding. A network of land, data, and control operating silently beneath the surface of everyday life. And as it grows, its influence becomes impossible to ignore. Any interruption is felt globally. The era of the silent system, the power is locked in. Every shift creates consequences, and not all of them are visible at first. Small farms disappear. Communities change, local control fades, replaced by larger, more efficient systems. But efficiency often comes at a cost, one that is rarely measured until it is too late. The loss of the human scale, a landscape transformed. Control is shifting away from the local level. Decisions made far from the land itself. Production determined by external priorities, not by community needs, but by system demands. And as this shift continues, the connection between people and the land begins to weaken. The export of sovereignty, a region hollowed out. The system becomes stronger, but also more essential. Billions depend on its stability. Because alternatives have disappeared, redundancy reduced, independence replaced with efficiency. And once a system becomes this critical, there is no easy way out. Any exit is a risk. The invisible tether that binds us all. Efficiency is a cage. This raises a question, not just of strategy, but of ethics. Who should control humanity's food? Should it remain distributed or become centralized, efficient or independent? Because the answer will shape the future of billions. Any choice has a heavy price. The moral dimension of the soil, a silent choice. The decision is not being made publicly. There is no global vote, no open debate, just transactions, agreements, ownership shifting quietly. Because once land changes hands, the system changes. And those changes are rarely reversed. Any reversal is an act of defiance. The permanence of possession, the finality of the shift. With every step forward, the system becomes more locked in, more efficient, more connected, more difficult to replace, because once infrastructure reaches this scale, it defines the future. And those within it must operate according to its rules. Any deviation is managed. The structural momentum of the grid, no turning back. This is the turning point, a shift between two models, one rooted in tradition, the other in efficiency. Human-scale systems versus industrial-scale networks. Any balance is temporary. And as the balance shifts, the question becomes unavoidable. Which system will define the future? The final choice of the modern era, power versus humanity. The system is built, the power is shifting, the balance is changing quietly, but irreversibly. And as the world moves deeper into uncertainty, this network of land and control will be tested. Because the real question is not how it was built, but what happens when it is pushed to its limits. End of part 2, prepared for the ultimate test. Every system, no matter how powerful, faces a moment of stress. A moment where conditions change faster than predictions, where models fail and reality takes over, because no system is perfect. And when pressure builds beyond expectation, cracks begin to appear. Disruption rarely stays isolated, it spreads. From farms to logistics to distribution. Each delay triggering another, each breakdown affecting the next layer. Because the system is connected, and when one part slows, everything feels it. Efficiency created strength, but also fragility. Because systems designed for speed leave little room for error. No backup, no redundancy, just continuous flow. And when that flow is interrupted, the weakness becomes visible. Markets respond instantly, prices rise, signals spread, uncertainty grows because markets are not just numbers. They are expectations. And when expectations shift, behavior follows. Fear enters the system, a powerful, unpredictable force. Control exists until it is tested. Under normal conditions, systems operate smoothly, predictably. But under stress, control becomes reactive. Decisions must be made quickly, without certainty, because even the most advanced systems cannot predict everything. For most people, the system is invisible until it fails. Until access changes, until prices rise, until availability becomes uncertain. And in those moments, the reality becomes clear. Dependence on a system means vulnerability when it breaks, As pressure builds, control tightens, distribution becomes regulated. Priorities are set, decisions centralized, because maintaining stability requires order, but order comes with restrictions. And restrictions reveal who truly controls the system. The system is still standing, but the pressure is growing. Cracks forming, signals spreading, tension rising across every layer. Because this is only the beginning, a test of a system built for efficiency, now facing reality. And what comes next will determine whether it holds or breaks. The first signals are subtle, small disruptions, minor delays, but within complex systems, small signals matter because they indicate something deeper, something systemic. And when those signals multiply, they point toward a breaking point approaching. Failure rarely comes from one source. It builds, layer upon layer. Climate stress, logistical breakdown, operational limits, each one adding pressure to the system until multiple failures begin to overlap, creating chaos. This is how systems fail, not instantly, but progressively. One delay triggers another, one disruption spreads to the next layer. A cascade effect, because when everything is connected, failure travels faster than recovery. Human behavior shifts quickly, from calm to urgency, from routine to reaction, because uncertainty triggers instinct to secure, to protect, to prepare. And when millions react at once, pressure multiplies instantly, because uncertainty triggers instinct to secure, to protect, to prepare, and when millions react at once, pressure multiplies instantly. The system was built for efficiency, not for surge demand, not for panic, not for sudden spikes in consumption. And when demand exceeds capacity, the system strains because it was never designed for this level of pressure. The system was built for efficiency, not for surge demand, not for panic, not for sudden spikes in consumption. And when demand exceeds capacity, the system strains because it was never designed for this level of pressure. Control has limits. No matter how advanced the system, there comes a point where it can no longer compensate, where decisions become reactive, where outcomes become uncertain, because real-world complexity cannot always be contained. Control has limits. No matter how advanced the system, there comes a point where it can no longer compensate, where decisions become reactive, where outcomes become uncertain, because real-world complexity cannot always be contained. What begins locally becomes global, because the system is interconnected. No region is isolated, no disruption contained, that is the rule. And as the effects spread, the entire network feels the impact, simultaneously. What begins locally becomes global, because the system is interconnected. No region is isolated, no disruption contained. And as the effects spread, the entire network feels the impact, simultaneously. In crisis, power shifts quickly. Those who still have supply gain leverage. Those who do not must adapt, because access becomes the defining factor. Not wealth, not technology, but availability. That is what matters. In crisis, power shifts quickly. Those who still have supply gain leverage. Those who do not must adapt, because access becomes the defining factor. Not wealth, not technology, but availability. The system is still standing, but barely, under pressure, strained, tested beyond its limits, because this is the edge, a breaking point. The point where systems either adapt or break. A choice must be made. And what happens next will define everything that follows. There is no going back. The first real break is not dramatic. It is quiet, a slowdown, a pause. A section of the system simply stops, because without supply, even the most advanced infrastructure becomes useless. And when one part stops, others soon follow, a chain reaction with no end in sight. The system begins to fragment. Some areas still function, others begin to fail. A patchwork of stability and breakdown, because interconnected systems cannot fail evenly. They break in patterns, unpredictable, and difficult to control. So very difficult to control. In crisis, priorities are established. Not everyone receives equal access. Supply is directed, managed, allocated. Because when resources are limited, decisions must be made. And those decisions reveal the structure of control. Humans adapt, they always have. Communities respond, organize, find alternatives. Because survival does not depend only on systems, it depends on people, on resilience, on the ability to adjust when structures fail. Humans adapt, they always have. Communities respond, organize, find alternatives. Because survival does not depend only on systems, it depends on people. on resilience, on the ability to adjust when structures fail. Centralization creates efficiency, but also concentration of risk. When large systems fail, the impact is massive because there are fewer backups, fewer alternatives, and when control is concentrated, so is vulnerability. Centralization creates efficiency, but also concentration of risk. When large systems fail, the impact is massive because there are fewer backups, fewer alternatives, and when control is concentrated, so is vulnerability. Access becomes the defining factor. Who gets supply, who waits, who adapts. Because in constrained systems, availability is not guaranteed, it is managed. And management creates hierarchy, that is the truth. Access becomes the defining factor. Who gets supply, who waits, who adapts. Because in constrained systems, availability is not guaranteed, it is managed. And management creates hierarchy. But the system does not collapse easily. It adapts, adjusts, attempts to recover, because it was designed to withstand disruption, to absorb shock, to restore balance, even under pressure. But the system does not collapse easily. It adapts, adjusts, attempts to recover, because it was designed to withstand disruption, to absorb shock, to restore balance, even under pressure. A new normal begins to form, not the system that existed before, but a modified version. Slower, more controlled, more aware of its limits. Because after disruption, systems rarely return unchanged. A new normal begins to form, not the system that existed before, but a modified version. Slower, more controlled, more aware of its limits. Because after disruption, systems rarely return unchanged. After the test, power becomes clearer. Those who maintained control emerge stronger. Those who depended reassess their position, because crisis reveals reality. It shows who controls the system and who relies on it. After the test, power becomes clearer. Those who maintained control emerge stronger. Those who depended reassess their position, because crisis reveals reality. It shows who controls the system and who relies on it. The system survives, but not unchanged, tested, exposed, revealed, because beneath the surface of stability, the truth is now visible. Control exists, but it comes with consequences, lasting consequences. The system survives, but not unchanged, tested, exposed, revealed, because beneath the surface of stability, the truth is now visible. Control exists, but it comes with consequences. After the chaos comes silence, not complete recovery, but adjustment. Systems stabilize, but differently, because what was exposed cannot be unseen, and what was tested cannot be ignored ever. After the chaos comes silence, not complete recovery, but adjustment. Systems stabilize, but differently, because what was exposed cannot be unseen, and what was tested cannot be ignored. Control brings stability, but also imbalance, because systems designed for efficiency do not always distribute equally. Some regions stabilize faster, others take longer. And in that difference, the cost of centralization becomes visible. A new order begins to take shape, more controlled, more structured, more centralized. Because after disruption, systems evolve. They adapt to prevent future instability. But in doing so, they become more defined, more rigid. A new order begins to take shape, more controlled, more structured, more centralized, because after disruption, systems evolve. They adapt to prevent future instability, but in doing so, they become more defined, more rigid. And once again, the question returns, who should control this system? Those who optimize it or those who depend on it? Efficiency or independence? Because the answer will define how the future is built. And once again, the question returns, who should control this system? Those who optimize it or those who depend on it? Efficiency or independence? Because the answer will define how the future is built. Awareness changes everything. What was once invisible becomes understood. What was ignored becomes questioned, because once people recognize dependence, they begin to think differently about systems, about control, about the future. Awareness changes everything. What was once invisible becomes understood. What was ignored becomes questioned. Because once people recognize dependence, they begin to think differently about systems, about control, about the future. There is no single path forward. Some will embrace centralization. Others will seek independence. Different systems, different strategies, different outcomes. Because the future is not fixed. It is shaped by the choices made today. There is no single path forward. Some will embrace centralization, others will seek independence. Different systems, different strategies, different outcomes. Because the future is not fixed, it is shaped by the choices made today. At its core, the system remains simple: soil, water, growth. Cycles that have existed for thousands of years, beyond systems, beyond control, beyond strategy, because no matter how advanced the world becomes, everything still begins here. At its core, the system remains simple: soil, water, growth. Cycles that have existed for thousands of years, beyond systems, beyond control, beyond strategy, because no matter how advanced the world becomes, everything still begins here. The system has been tested, the truth has been revealed, and the future remains uncertain. Because what comes next is not just about systems or control or power, it is about choice. The choice of how the world moves forward. The system has been tested, the truth has been revealed, and the future remains uncertain. Because what comes next is not just about systems or control or power. It is about choice. The choice of how the world moves forward. The system did not collapse. It adapted, it stabilized, but it did not return to what it once was. Because once tested, systems evolve. They become more structured, more controlled, and more aware of their own limits. After every disruption, there are those who emerge stronger. Those who anticipated the shift, who secured the resources, who built the systems. Because in moments of uncertainty, preparation becomes power, and power reveals itself most clearly after the test. The system has been redefined. More efficient, more predictive, more controlled. Built not just for growth, but for resilience. Because the lessons of disruption have been embedded into its design. The global balance has now shifted significantly. New alliances formed, new dependencies created, brand new systems are being established everywhere. Because after disruption, the world does not return to equilibrium. It resets into something new. But beyond systems, beyond strategies, the human question remains. How much control is too much? How much efficiency comes at the cost of independence? Because every system reflects the choices behind it. Two very different futures begin to emerge now. One centralized, controlled, optimized for scale. The other, distributed, independent, built on resilience. Both possible, both real, both shaping the world ahead. The future is not predetermined. It is shaped by decisions. Every policy, every investment, every choice. Because systems do not exist on their own. They are built, maintained, and changed by people. In the end, everything comes back to something simple. Not technology, not markets, not systems, but the land itself. Because no matter how the world changes, the foundation remains the same. And the future will always be written in soil. For billions of people, food is no longer something they produce. It is something they receive, delivered daily, reliably, without question. But beneath that reliability lies dependence. A system that must function every single day. Every meal depends on something unseen. A chain of events stretching far beyond the store. Fields, workers, systems, all working together. And most of the time, this trust is invisible until something interrupts it. As systems become more controlled, trust shifts. From communities to institutions, from individuals to centralized systems. Because when scale increases, control follows. And control changes the relationship between people and the systems they depend on. But there is another side to this story: smaller systems. Local resilience, communities that remain connected to the land. Less efficient, but more independent. Because resilience often comes from diversity, not scale. The future may not belong to one system alone, but to a balance between them: scale and resilience, efficiency and independence. Because no single model that can solve every challenge. And the strongest systems are those that adapt. The next generation will inherit this system. Not the one that existed before, but the one being built now. More complex, more interconnected, more powerful, because every decision made today shapes the world they will live in tomorrow. In the end, the most valuable asset is not technology, not data, not markets. It is the foundation itself, the soil, the water, the ability to grow. Because everything else depends on it. From a distance, the system looks simple, a planet sustaining life. But within that simplicity exists complexity. Systems, decisions, structures of control, all shaping how that life continues. The future is not distant, it is already forming in every field, every system, every decision, because what we build today becomes the reality of tomorrow. And the question is no longer what is happening, but what will we choose to happen next? The world reflects itself through its land. Some regions thrive, others struggle. Different systems, different realities, but all connected within one global network. Because no nation, no system exists in isolation anymore. Despite differences, there is a shared reality, dependence on systems, on networks, on each other. Because food does not recognize borders, it flows where it is needed, connecting the world in ways few other systems can. Even after recovery, fragility remains. Because no system becomes perfect, only more aware of its limits. And those limits will be tested again. Because change is constant and pressure never truly disappears. Every disruption leaves behind a lesson, a shift in understanding, a change in approach, because survival depends on adaptation, on learning from what was revealed, and applying it to what comes next. Strategic power is never actually absolute. No system, no matter how advanced, is immune to reality. This is because all forms of control have limits, and those limits are defined by the world itself, not by strategy alone. Beyond systems, there are people, working, adapting, creating resilience, because no matter how advanced systems become, they still depended on human decisions, human effort, human responsibility. The path forward is not fixed. It is being shaped in real time by choices, investments, policies, because the future of food is not predetermined. It is built step by step. The answer may not be one system, but balance between control and independence, between efficiency and resilience. Because strength does not come from extremes, but from stability between them. At the center of everything is something simple, the land. It does not change with markets or systems or power structures. It remains constant, essential, the foundation of all life. Everything leads back to this moment, a point of understanding, a recognition of what truly matters. Because beneath all systems, all strategies, all structures, there is a foundation, and that foundation will always define the future. In the end, the truth is not hidden. It was never hidden. This fundamental truth was simply overlooked for too long. Because in a world chasing speed, we forgot what remains constant, what sustains everything, what exists beneath all systems. Every structure, every system, every form of power depends on something simple. The land, the water, the cycle of growth, things that cannot be replaced, cannot be manufactured, cannot be ignored. True power is not always visible. It does not always speak loudly. It does not always dominate headlines. Sometimes it exists quietly, embedded within systems, supporting everything, while being seen by almost no one. Because the most powerful systems are the ones we cannot live without. The question was never simple: control or independence, efficiency or resilience. The answer is not one or the other, but understanding the balance. Because the future belongs to those who recognize both. The future is not decided by systems alone. It is shaped by people, by decisions made every day, because systems do not control themselves. They are built, guided, and changed by human choice. This moment will define an era, a turning point, where systems evolved and awareness grew. Because the decisions made now will shape the world for generations to come. In a world driven by change, one truth remains. Everything begins here, in the soil, in the land, in the cycles that sustain life itself. Because no matter how advanced we become, we never move beyond the foundation. The future will not be decided by those who control the fastest technology or the most advanced systems. It will be decided by those who understand and control what the world cannot live without.